We're going to talk about the road to the Texas Revolution and kind of the trouble, the ongoing trouble that continues. I really want you to focus today as you listen and pay attention to these different events. Is notice how tensions continue to escalate. Notice how each side plays a role in the growing tensions between uh, the people in Texas and the Mexican government. So politics in Mexico. So just as a recap or a reminder from yesterday, there's really two groups in Mexico at this time. There's the centralists that wanted a strong central government. That's what they currently have. And Anastasio Bustamante is the leader of this faction of this group and the president of Mexico at this time. There is another group of federalists that have growing support throughout the country, in Texas included, but not just in Texas. And they are federalists, and they want states to have more power than the central government. This more closely resembles the United States government. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna is kind of the leader of this group, and Mexico's civil war over this is won by the Federalists, and Santa Anna is elected president of Mexico. And so there's this ongoing turmoil in Mexico in the early 1830s, and so that is the backdrop of all these events that are going on in Texas, because these are not isolated events in Texas. Anahuac, there's some problems in Anahuac. Anahuac is a place where there's collecting taxes and things of that nature, but it's not a very good location for that. And so a lot of Americans are upset about that location, or they're just ignoring the taxes. And these are import taxes on goods coming in from Mexico or from Texas or from the United States. And so it's not really convenient to go to Anahuac to pay these, and because it's pretty far inland. And so a lot of people just ignore it. Well, that causes some problems. Ultimately, Patrick Jack and William Barrett Travis, two men, are arrested, but they're not actually charged with a crime. And so they're just held in jail. Texans kind of find out about this and they're upset. And so they go to demand they'll be released. Bradburn refuses. Well, what are they going to do? Well, there's kind of two different groups. One group kind of settles back and comes up with these Turtle Bayou resolutions that we talked briefly about yesterday. And we'll look at what the other group does in just after we finish this slide. So the Texans are angry because they, like we said, they were upset about William Barrett Travis and Patrick Jack being arrested. And so they pass these resolutions, come up with these resolutions, basically kind of to give themselves cover, saying, "Hey, look, we know we're fighting against this particular Bradburn and this particular group, but we're still loyal to Mexico. We're not showing that we're disloyal to Mexico by doing this." So they're kind of covering their tracks, covering that, making it look like they're not really ultimately rebelling from all of Mexico and just rebelling against. They're part of this fight for federalism, and they support Santa Anna, and they declare that in these Turtle Bayou resolutions. They just say some other things, but those are kind of the big ones. They're loyal to Mexico and they support Santa Anna. Well, so one group was kind of hauled back at Turtle Bayou and said, pass those resolutions. Another group heads to Velasco to get some cannons. There was a private citizen that had a cannon, and so they go to get that. And and you can see here, so this is the Brazos River. Here's Fort Velasco, a circular fort. Here's the Gulf of Mexico. And so they know that they are not, so they've got these ships that they want to get these cannons past down the Brazos River. Well, they know that Ugartechea, the commander at Fort Velasco, is not likely to let them pass without kind of seeing what's going on. And so they look to see, they say, they know they've got cannons, and sure enough, they don't let them pass. And so during the fight, that takes place, there's some Texans that are on land, some out here on the ships, and ultimately, unfortunately for the Mexican army, they don't have enough ammunition. They're somewhat outnumbered. It's a small fort that's just kind of been set up very recently, and so they're not really fully outfitted or anything like that. And they're outnumbered, and they are almost completely out of ammunition. And the Texans are able to take their cannon and go on back where they want to go. And so this is the Battle of Velasco, and it's actually a victory for the Texans because they're they're dealing with a smaller force and one that's not properly outfitted with enough ammunition. So that's going on in the backdrop. And so they call, while that's kind of going on, and just after that, there's a call for a convention of 1832 that is basically, they're saying, hey, we want to kind of explain where we are and what we want from this new government that they're hoping is going to be formed. And so there's delegates from 16 districts, none Tejano, so there's no delegates from San Antonio or Victoria. And so they pass these resolutions. Basically, they want an extension of the tariff exemption. They don't want to have to pay taxes on goods coming from the United States. They want to allow general immigration for the United States again. So they're asking for that. They begin to plan and organize a militia. They call for committees of vigilance, safety, and correspondence. In other words, these two items here, these two are like kind of preparing for fighting. A committee of vigilance and safety and correspondence. Those correspondence, that's a committee that's going to be in charge of like getting the information out. Vigilance and safety is kind of paying attention, finding out what's going on, and committees of safety are helping to provide security and forces for protection. Well, so those are kind of getting ready for potential fighting. And then finally, and this is kind of a big one, they request separate statehood from Coahuila. So Texas is requesting that. And these requests are never presented to the Mexican government for several reasons. One, it's only Americans that are present. So it's only the Anglo settlers that are there. There's none from San Antonio, Victoria, the larger Tejano settlements, and so that they don't have any representation there because they didn't send anybody, and so that's a bad look. It looks like it's just the Americans that are upset, and it's partly because that's true to a certain extent. Austin believed that the request for statehood was premature, so he's like, no, he thinks this is a bad idea, and the federalist government has not yet even taken over, and so the likelihood that who are they going to go tell? Clearly the centralists aren't going to be in favor of any of this, and so that nothing happens. So what do? 1 year later, once again, Austin's trying to say, hey, slow down here, slow down. But they don't. And so there's a convention of 1833. But now San Antonio has sent delegates as well. Now San Antonio elects James Bowie as their representative. He is the son-in-law of one of the leaders there in San Antonio, one of the Tejano leaders there in San Antonio. So they want an extension on the tariff. They want general immigration from the United States. They're asking for additional protection from raids by Native Americans that are happening, especially in East Texas. And then they are requesting separate statehood from Coahuila still. And they actually begin to create a new constitution, write up a new state constitution, what that would look like. Juan Seguin is a part of this. He's a supporter of this. He is very much in favor of the Federalist government and the Constitution of 1824 and kind of liberalizing things in Texas at this time and not such centralized government at this time. So once again, James Miller and Stephen F. Austin are chosen to present the positions to the government, but Seguin and Miller are unable to go, so Austin goes alone to Mexico City. Well, he ultimately is going to be arrested. So when he gets to Mexico City, by this time Santa Anna is in charge. He has been elected and he has taken power. But there's a lot of chaos in Mexico City. What's going on is not real clear. And so he writes a letter back to Texas to encourage them to begin setting up their state government. And then he's able to convince Santa Anna to allow immigration from the U.S. to Texas, but the president will not grant Texas separate statehood. So then he's like headed back, and Mexican authorities intercept the letter that Austin had written to the Texans saying to set up the state government. And they inform Santa Anna of Austin's desire to create this government. And Santa Anna finds out, he's upset. And so he says, get Austin, have him arrested and brought back to Mexico City. And so Austin's arrested. And then shortly after this, Santa Anna, turns out, declares himself dictator. And so he's even more, at least as much a centralist as Bustamante, because he's no longer supporting federalism. He himself is now basically taking over as leader and saying he has much more authority than he had been elected with, and so he now declares himself dictator, which is a leader who rules with absolute authority. And so that is kind of where we end. And so we've got all these problems, and we can see back and forth. We can see that the Texans are kind of pushing for different things, and probably prematurely. Mexico is already leery of what's going on in Texas, and then there's this chaos that's going on in all of Mexico with this fight between the Federalists and the Centralists, different groups trying to gain power. And so when that's going on, if there's a problem in another place, it's or in one of your frontier areas, that's an extra problem you don't need. And so we've got this back and forth going on. Texans requesting and asking for these rights and these powers when there's a lot of chaos in the central government. And then finally it looks like things are kind of maybe going to ease up a little bit. And then Santa Anna reveals himself to be a dictator. And so we see problems brewing. And this is not going to make things better in Texas.